Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Backlog Banter. This is our weekly show where we're going to be talking to you about the games that we've been playing this past week. Last week, we were in person. We played some stuff together that trickled over into this week's episode. But if you want to talk to us about our games and any games you've been playing, interested in what you've been playing, join our Discord. The link's in the description. You've also got some other, fun little thingamajigs, bits and bobs down there. A subscribe button, that's fun. Like button, that's also, gives yourself a little fun boost to your morning to click a like button on a BLB
Of
video.
course.
That's what my
A
grandpappy
bell?
always told me. Oh, there's a bell down there too. Go a little ring
Yeah.
a ding ding. You know what I'm saying?
I know what you're
But
saying.
Abram Buhner, you've played a good amount of video games this past week. Because I
Yeah.
remember seeing you play a good amount of those video games. Where do you want to start?
Well, so Tucker, I've got 5 games. I've
Sheesh.
got
Actually, hold
I've
on.
got
Just let me
three I want to talk about in a more robust way. We've got overlap with one of those. And 2 games I want to give some shout outs to, I suppose.
Sure.
So I want to actually give a shout out before the shout out. Very briefly, I finished the Mario Golf Super Rush adventure mode. I'm not really going
Oh
to talk
yeah.
about it here because we have a whole video coming out, but just know that I'm still playing Mario Golf. I'm still liking multiplayer a lot. Single players, we'll discuss it
Yeah.
in due time here on the channel. So you see those thoughts soon.
Congratulations. Very proud of
Thank
you.
you.
It took a lot of pushing.
Yeah,
And that's one thing we know about you. It takes a lot for
yeah,
you to get things done. You're a slow
yes,
person, your brain working at like,
yes.
sixth speed most of the time. But but
Sixth speed seems fair.
but I was around. I was giving you a little pat on the back to fit a little rub, pat your tummy, rub your head, whatever the hell.
It
Finish
took
Mario
one
Golf
sitting
Super
also.
Rush. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. And that was
it
that
took
was the
me one
reason I
sitting.
was like, just fucking finish it. Like you've got time. You've sitting in airports. You're sitting around my house doing goddamn nothing.
Yes.
Just beat this stupid game so we can talk about it. And you did, and we talked about it. And that video will be going up in the future.
So do you want me to still go with another one?
Yeah. Because that doesn't really count.
Well, let me hit you with my shout out game for the week, right? I want to hit you a
Was
Super
that
Smash
was it
Bros.
not
Melee.
Super Rush? I thought that
No,
was the shout
this
out.
is the other shout out.
Okay,
This is Super Smash Bros. Melee.
that's
The reason it's just
interesting.
a shout out right now is I didn't play a ton of it yet.
Okay,
But we were bulling about in Lincoln, Nebraska as young boys our age do, and we ended up in a retro game shop. And from there, I spent no small amount of money on a copy of Super Smash Bros. Melee, which brings me within, I would say, 4 or 5 games of having every GameCube title I want, which is
that's
pretty exciting.
that's very impressive.
Yeah, and so I got back home. I played it for one evening. I have played Melee in the past a long time ago,
Mhm.
but not since Ultimate has come out. So it's been an acre of time since I've
Mhm.
played this game last. And shit, I'm not very good at it.
Yeah.
I forgot what a mechanical disparity there is between Melee and the other titles, which makes it really
Mhm.
fun and makes me really excited to run through some classic modes and run through especially adventure mode, which I definitely want to play and talk about. But on the whole, just jumping into some Smash matches, I forgot how unpolished and absurdly fun Melee is. And so I'm just really excited to play more and talk about it more in a robust way next week.
I only have a small amount of experience with Melee, and as I have a copy, but I didn't bring it to Link, and I also don't have something to play it on here, so it wouldn't matter anyway. Um, do you have a cat that's screaming at you?
That's a bird outside.
Oh, okay. It sounds like Paul, which is
No,
one of
it's
his
not
cats, by the way.
Paul.
I wasn't
Yeah.
referring to like Paul McCartney or who knows what he's doing.
I keep him
Wait,
trapped
is he
under the
dead?
floorboards.
Is he alive? Which one of the Beatles is? I don't even know. You keep Paul McCartney trapped in your floorboards?
Yeah.
Okay,
And I
all
don't know
right.
if he's dead or alive.
Yeah, I think they made a video game about that one. Okay, but Super Smash Bros. Melee. Back to the topic at hand.
Yeah.
No more Beatles talk. I promise. Uh, I haven't played it in a very long time because, in all honesty, I'm not very competitive at Smash, and
Yeah.
I don't really see much reason to go back to the older titles. It was fun to dick around in Smash 64 for a little bit, and Melee is very different. But I remember trying it out the first few times at friends' houses and just being like, I felt pretty confident in my Smash skills in Brawl and Wii U and 3DS. But when I tried Melee, my friends were just handily whipping my ass because
Yeah.
there's such a slipperiness to the game in way that the rest of the titles don't have, and it's really interesting how different it feels. Like you essentially control the same in terms of you have mostly the same moves
Sure.
across all
Yeah.
the characters, but I felt it. I felt this really difficult to get my character to do what I wanted. And of course, just because I'm not used to it, I'm not saying that Melee's got anything, inherently super wrong with it. That's a whole discussion for another time. But
Yeah.
even as a Smash player who's experienced with Smash, that time I was like, oh my God, I was slipping around as crazy.
I think it's the closest to being a fighting game opposed to a party fighter, in the sense that
Mhm.
there is a much higher skill ceiling here, and to get on a skill floor of adequate takes a lot more work than it does in
Yeah.
the other games, which I find pretty compelling. So more thoughts next week. That's what I'll tell you right now.
You want me to hit you with my first game of the week?
Go for it.
My first game of the week is also one of your first games of the week, which we're going to be talking about Streets of Rage on the
Sure.
Sega Genesis or Mega Drive if you're so Europeanly inclined.
No, you shouldn't though. Let's just put it out there.
That would be
Just put it out there.
ridiculous.
Yes.
But we played Streets of Rage on the Sega Genesis Classics Collection on my Nintendo Switch, which
Yeah.
has perfect local co-op, and I think the game is really, really fun. I have no
Yeah.
experience with the beat 'em up genre. The ones that I have dabbled in, I just think are kind of honestly boring. I'm not big into the genre, but I'm always willing to give new genres and game styles a try. And I had this in the collection, and you were over, and it's got co-op, and I'm so glad that we played it because I think beat 'em
Yeah.
ups for me are pretty simple and empty when you're playing by yourself. But as soon as you add in the element of cooperative play and a little bit, maybe a little too much friendly fire with your punches and your
Sure.
grabs, it introduces another element that really made it a lot more engaging to me. And we beat the game in 1.5 sittings, whatever. It was like an hour and 20 minutes for us to beat it, so not long at
Yeah.
all. But that game holds up ridiculously well.
Yeah, I liked it a lot. So I had played Streets of Rage 4 previously. That was my first Streets of Rage title, which is the reboot from Dotemu, which is a fucking phenomenal game. I really loved it. One of my favorites from last year for sure. And so going back to the original was kind of peculiar. It gave me a nice sense of history and sort of the evolution of the franchise. I want to play. We already have plans to play 2 and 3 online together. Um, but it is very simple.
Mm-hmm.
There's not too much nuance to the combat at all, and I
Yeah.
think part of the fun of 4 is the depth, the risk and reward of your special system, how much nuance you have in your combos and everything, and in the items. So this is much more of a pared back experience, but contextualizing it within its time. Beautiful parallaxed backgrounds,
Oh God,
really
yeah.
great character designs, simple but solid mechanics. Like you said, I think it's definitely elevated by co-op, and it really was a great time. But I am hoping that when we play 2 and play 3, is a little bit more meat on the bone.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest complaint with the game, and of course we are contextualizing it in that it was one of the early examples of its genre, and the fact is that it holds up really well today. Regardless, it's fun to play, but it is really simple.
Yeah,
You mentioned risk and reward in 4. There's no risk and reward for your supers in this. When you want to do a lot of damage to an enemy, you press the button and you do a lot of
yeah,
damage to the enemy. There's no reason to not use it essentially. And also you have like 4 moves that your character can do, and some of them are like hard to pull off because they're a grab with a throwback or whatever. But you've got a jab combo, a jump kick, and a couple of grab things. And of course there's weapons as well, which is interesting. But I honestly didn't feel that those were like incredibly useful. It is a very, very simple experience, but the fact is that simplicity I think is fine by me considering how short the game is and how it, it didn't take us long to get through. So it wasn't
yeah,
like I was waiting for the mechanics to evolve. There were 8 stages. The enemy variety is decent. It's not great, but we were always moving at a good clip through the stages. So
yeah.
I was never like, all right, we have to do this again. But I'm excited to see how the series evolves and get more moves for your characters, and the items and the stages are probably
Yeah.
more interesting. But oh man, that pixel art and that ridiculous 90s like rad grunge that it's got with this
Sure, yeah.
over the chart story, like it's very 90s, but I had a great time playing it.
Yeah, me too. And like I said, I'm excited to try the 2 and 3, but I'm more compelled to play like a River City Girls or some of the
Sure.
other really acclaimed modern beat 'em ups that I haven't tried.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, all in preparation for TMNT Shredder's Revenge, because then when that drops, it's gonna be the only beat 'em up I'm gonna want to play. But we'll squeeze a little bit more. We'll engage in a little bit more Streets of Rage
Sure.
in the
We'll
coming months.
engage in the rage.
Yes,
New title for a Streets of Rage retrospective series. Engage in the rage. That sounds like a band.
it does. It makes me think. It makes me think of id Software's Rage.
Yeah, but I I haven't played Rage. I haven't heard great things about those games. I'd much rather play Streets of Rage, to be honest.
Rage 2 is not very good.
No.
That's what I'll tell you right now. So do I get to go again?
Why not? Let's just go for it.
Well, let's go for another game we both played this week. Let's go for Tetris Effect.
Yeah, let's do it.
So Tetris Effect, I played for the first time early this year and loved
You might
it.
have talked about it on the show.
Yeah, I definitely talked about it in a sort of circumspect way.
Mhm.
Mentioned it as like, so much of the experience is playing it in the firsthand, aesthetics and everything. So I probably didn't talk about it too much, but now you've played it, so we can kind of bounce off each other a little bit more. And I think this game is beautiful and emotional and mechanically perfect. And I actually bumped it up to my fourth favorite game of the year so far after my second playthrough.
Mhm.
There's just such a great harmony between the visuals and the gameplay and the soundtrack and everything, and sort of that the places that those intersect the best, the way that you hear certain sounds when you're flipping a piece and the music changes as you're building more lines and you get faster speeds and everything. It's just such a dynamic and perfect experience. I really love Tetris Effect.
I started it when you were around, and you were like,
Yes.
you just need to try it. You can beat it pretty quickly. It's fucking
Yeah.
Tetris. Just play the damn game. And I'm like, okay, fine. Download it on Game Pass, boot it up, and it had probably been a year since I'd played any version of Tetris before
Yeah.
that, and really, I was just overwhelmed. I got that Tetris stress very easily, where you mess up something and cascades into getting you very close to the top, and then I end up failing quite a bit. However,
Yeah.
I think as soon as I no longer had the pressure of you fucking Tetris master breathing down my neck the next morning after you had left, I
Yeah.
beat the game very quickly, and I think a lot of the greatness of this game comes from the fact that it really utilizes psychology to get you in the groove of wanting to do really well at the game, so you get the audio visual feedback and the dopamine rush of completing the lines and the lights flashing you and everything. It's literally based off of the psychological effect called the Tetris effect, where you get into the zone and continue to see Tetris pieces and clearing lines in your mind after you finish the game. And let me tell you, that shit stuck with me for like 3 days. I was doing plenty of things, and in my mind I was like, ooh, if I like rotated a T block or like a Z block or whatever and put it there, yeah, that would be tasty. And I experienced that, and it really, really worked. My thing that holds back this game, I think, from being perfect, and just as a note, I only played the journey mode. I think you've only played the journey mode. But there's
I've
plenty of
dabbled
other
in the other
side
modes,
content.
but yeah,
There's plenty of other side content, which makes this a great package. But in the journey mode, I find that there's a pretty big gulf in the engagement that I get from different kinds of levels. The first few with the lyrics and the insane particle effects and stuff are incredible, and I think in some ways the peak of the game in terms of audiovisual experience. But there are a handful throughout that are just pretty barren in terms of the backgrounds, in terms of the way that the music is interacting with you. And I just wish that it had been all highs. I mean, I know it needs to tone down occasionally, and it doesn't, not everyone needs to have lyrics, but when I'm doing a level that's just white cubes and like drum, like snare beats, that really is not as engaging from a visual perspective, a music perspective, anything, as a lot of the other ones that hit such crazy emotional highs in terms of their background complexity and the music swelling and stuff. So those few levels hold it back from being entirely perfect to me, but it's also a game that I was driven to get better at, and I'm interested to replay eventually, which is not something I say about a lot of games.
Yeah, so I see where you're coming from, but I don't necessarily agree, because this is a one sitting experience. Ideally, in my opinion, turn out the lights, put on your headphones, you can beat it regardless of your level, your Tetris ability, within probably 2 hours, even if you're fucking up. It's not especially long. And so I think about it the way you think about any album. It's got to have those lower notes. And what works for me about Tetris Effect is the way that it blends musical styles and genre and different musical cultures and everything. And
Mhm.
the way they come together stops it from feeling homogenized. There's so many different
Sure.
sounds and styles that the end result is something that does feel bigger and feels connected as the lyrics to the opening track
And the
of
title implies.
yes, as the opening track to this journey mode implies, the ways that it creates this fusion of the music canon and landscape and what music means to different cultures and groups and everything is important. And I think that it strikes a good balance and marries all of those, especially when you can get out of an area in 2 minutes.
Mhm.
In the amount of time it would take you to listen to a song, you're on to the next one. And I think
Yeah.
that medley is part of the success, in my opinion.
Sure. No, and I definitely understand that. I just think the handful that really did end up frustrating me with their simplicity is because I found the sound effects of moving the blocks and rotating them to be just grating occasionally. It was very
Sure.
sparingly, but I don't want a level to be obnoxious to listen to. And when there are those in the game, I can't help but bring that up, especially considering it feels really out of place in comparison to a lot of the other ones. I don't, I'm not the sound designer, I'm not the music guy. I couldn't tell you what to replace those with, but in all honesty, if they had, it's very short, but if they'd cut the levels that I found to be, grating on the ears to play, it would be a flawless experience for me.
All right. Makes sense.
Now it's my turn, and
Yeah.
I'm hopping onto something really special. Really, really, really special. Again, we started talking about last week, and I have since done everything there is to do in.
Oh,
Of
sure.
course,
Yeah.
we're talking about Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, one of my new favorite video games of all time. This
You had
is,
it pretty high in that list. I saw it in there somewhere.
yeah, it's in my like 50s range, which is, I mean, I've played a lot of video games, so it even reaching that echelon is already
Yeah.
ridiculous. It's not flawless. It's not one of my top
Yeah.
25 experiences of all time, but the fact is, I don't think there's many metrics that this game doesn't hit all bars on it, and then for a solid amount of them, it surpasses my expectations for what this genre does. I think this is clearly the PS5 selling exclusive right now in terms of
Sure.
accessibility, in terms of the visuals being top of the line across the entire industry, and as I said, every metric that this game has, it just blew me away, and I really think
Yeah.
it's a very near flawless experience. It's got a few technical errors, but in a game of this ridiculous scope and quality, those bugs and glitches and occasionally clipping through a fucking whatever, that didn't really hurt my experience at all.
Sure. I just don't agree. I suppose, and I don't want to turn it into a bitching about Ratchet and Clank segment again because I'm really curious about your experience platinuming the game and getting
Mhm.
through and getting that 100%. But I just don't think it does a lot for me. I think I'm far past the point. I just think gaming is far past the point where aesthetics are going to wow me anymore. A
Mhm.
lot of stuff I played on PS4 does not look nearly as good as Rift Apart, but is so far above where we used to be that's what I get wowed by. I'm not really wowed by anything anymore.
Sure.
After I've seen Last of Us 2 and Ratchet and Clank 2016,
Of
and
course. Yeah.
now it's more about art direction and things that are going to compel me. So I find myself playing Rift Apart and seeing another Ratchet and Clank game with combat that doesn't quite hit the mark for me. It feels a little bit too simple. Doesn't feel like I need to strategize as much. I
Mhm.
see a kind of lack of traditional platforming that I'm looking for, and a kind of disappointment in the way that Rivet and Ratchet are basically interchangeable.
Sure.
And so I don't. I was really excited to read your review and see you praise it in such a way that's so polar opposite to how I feel. Because even though I didn't enjoy the game very much, and I don't necessarily see it in the same light you do, I'm glad you played it, and it kinda makes my purchase feel better because I bought it and you played off my account, so, like,
Yeah.
$70 well spent because you got one of your favorite games out of it.
Mhm.
But I just don't see the game in the same lens you do.
I think maybe the difference that we're looking at this through is obviously I think that core gameplay loop, which is something that we've
Yeah,
talked about in terms of what you look for out of a gameplay loop. For me, a lot of the draw of this game and why I think that it connects with me so much, and B is being so highly praised across the board is that there is a feedback loop there that
sure.
genuinely it impacts every aspect of the game. You've got the exploration, you've got the upgrade, you've got the combat. All three
Yeah.
of those aspects feed into each other in very meaningful ways. And on top of that, you've got a lot of side characters and high quality, writing and voice acting and things that fuel you to want to go interact with things in a much deeper way. And so when I'm
Yeah.
getting a new weapon, and I'm like, okay, well, I have this now. If I go use it, I'm rewarded for experimenting with that weapon, even if it's not something I'm particularly interested in initially. I've got a limited amount of ammo for it, so as soon as it runs out, I can switch to something else and learn how that synergizes with another weapon. And you can really do damage combos if you link your weapons in a certain way, because you pause time when you open your weapon wheel. There
Yeah.
is a feedback loop in the gameplay there that I think can get very engaging and strategic. It's not hard, it's not complex, but there is, I think, more depth and nuance than you're probably letting on, probably because you didn't necessarily experiment with the whole roster of weapons and stuff. And then, of course, you are getting experience for each weapons. They level up, they start doing more damage, they eventually get upgraded, and you are fueled through your exploration to collect more raritanium, which you take back to Mrs. Zircon, and then it upgrades that, and the weapons start synergizing even better together, and everything just flows and flows and flows, and it's always that one
Sure.
more step thing. You get a little bit of raritanium, you're like, okay, well, I might as well just go back to Mrs. Zircon and put this in. Oh, well,
Yeah.
now I've got this upgraded. I want to see what it does now that's upgraded, how much better it is. So I'll go do a little bit of combat. Oh, I just had a little bit more of experience I need on this weapon. And then I can, put that behind and try something else. There's a lot in terms of interactability and diversity in your move set. And even when it comes to weapons that do essentially the same thing, there's an ice thing and the topiary gun. They only have a limited amount of ammo. So when
Yeah.
you've got both of them, you can put down the topiary thing, let that run its course. It does a bunch of things. You can pull out a couple different weapons that'll do damage to those enemies. And when that runs out, you've got the ice gun, which interacts with them slightly differently, but I think adds visual flair and different sort of dynamicism to the battles. And I think this game's strongest suit is just that zen focus that you get, knowing your entire move set and what everything does with one another, and feeling so in control of each battle. You know exactly what you can
Sure.
do, how each enemy interacts with each kind of weapons, and then even though everything's like exploding in your face with insane weapon effects and particle effects, you're instantly aware of what's going on at all times.
Yeah.
And I found that to be really, really compelling, especially when going for that 100% completion. This game is very accessible in terms of its trophy system, in terms of the collectibles going on, appearing on your map when got to a certain part in the game. There's a side quest that gets you an item that shows you where everything is, and each of the items that you collect fuels back into your upgrades and to your character and unlocks side things and extra lore. There's such an interconnectedness to this experience where every system feeds into the rest in really interesting ways. And on
Sure.
top of all of that, I think this game takes my issues with the story, the simplicity of the story of the first game or the reboot, and just knocks it out of the park. It inserts you back into the crazy history of Ratchet and Clank. It introduces a really interesting concept in terms of flipping everything you expect on its head. And all four of the main characters, and I mentioned this in my review, which may be card in the corner if I remember, they each have really compelling character arcs and like emotional conflicts within them, and each of those fuel into each other in different ways, because each character has their own emotional strengths and weaknesses, and they all end up supporting each other in the end. And I found that story to be really compelling. While it is simple, a cartoon, whatever, and there are some aspects that you can just brush under the rug, like, okay, yeah, this is a kid story. It does have that nuance and that creativity that really puts it a step above. And I'm really
Sure.
impressed with what Insomniac did in terms of, I think, making this the premier PS5 exclusive. And of course, that's not saying much. There's not a lot to compete
Yeah.
with at the moment, but I think this is the reason you get a PS5 at the moment. It's high quality in terms of its visuals, in terms of the solidity of its gameplay. There's a lot to do in the game in terms of side content and the ease of collectability, so you're always wanting to go for something more. And you just you get a PlayStation first party IP with all the quality that goes behind that. I think it hits every metric and beyond across the board.
Well, there we go. I mean, I don't know what else because I mean, yeah. I'm very glad you had such a good time with it. I guess what I'm curious about, are you going to go back and play like Crack in Time? Because I know
Oh,
that's widely considered to
100%.
be the best.
Yeah.
I'll be very curious to hear your thoughts about more Ratchet games when you play more.
I've got Up Your Arsenal PS2, and now that I
Sure.
have access
That's a
to
good one.
PS Now, as I played Hohokam and Last Guy last week, they've got All for One on there. They've got Quest for Booty
Yeah.
on there. They've got
Crack in
there's a
Time, I
lot.
believe, is on there.
Yeah, Crack in Time, and I think there's one more. They've got
Into the Nexus, which I've also played.
I don't think Into the Nexus is one of them actually.
I
Maybe
played
I'm
it on
wrong.
PS Now, so unless I took it
Okay,
off.
then
So it
who
should be
knows?
still be on there.
But there's a solid amount of the PS3 ones on there, which
Yeah.
I'm definitely interested in. And also, there's a PS3 collection of the original trilogy from PS2.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of Ratchet stuff to play, and that really excites me because I think the series is endlessly fascinating, especially because I'm not familiar with the differences between each of the games, seeing as I've only played the two newest ones.
Sure. Well, I'm sure we'll have more to report about Ratchet and Clank on BLB in the coming
100%.
weeks.
100%.
Tucker, let's talk about So let's see. I've got one, two. I think I've got 2 games left. That sounds
Okay.
about right to me. How many do you have?
I've got 3, but I'm not sure if I really care to talk about one of them. I'll talk about it a little bit.
Yeah, why don't you do it right now? Why
Okay,
don't you tell
well
me what
then
it
the
is?
one I was already a little bit hesitant to talk about, and not because there's anything wrong with this game, but I did try Bomb Chicken on your
Sure.
Nintendo Switch. We call it Brum Pass, which is where I download
Yes.
games from Abrams account. And I was just curious with what bomb
Yeah.
checking was because I remember seeing it. You shit out a stack of bombs, and that's fun in and of itself. And
Yeah.
also it's developed by one of my childhood developers, which is Nitrome, a gaming creation group that made browser games for the longest time. Dozens and dozens and dozens, if not hundreds, of browser games, all of which hit a really high bar of quality and creativity. I remember playing Skywire and Feed Me and Cheese Dreams and um, all these games when I was a kid in my browser with my friends because they also have local 2 people on a keyboard co-op or multiplayer. And Bomb Chicken, I think, is really cool conceptually. It just really clearly feels like, yeah, this was a mobile slash browser game initially. And it's fine that it's on console because I think it's a fun game and it's got, polish to it, but it's just so simple. It's just so
Yeah.
simple. You have move and shit bombs. Every button shits bombs. And I think it's interesting to have such simple mechanics that you have to engage with in different ways in terms of the levels, but it's just a little bit too simple for me. It's a fun concept for a platformer. It's a puzzle platformer, but I don't know. I don't really feel any compelling reason to go back to it after I've experienced the joy of putting a bomb out a chicken's ass. That's
Sure.
really all I needed, and I played an hour of it, hour and a half, and I think that's enough for me.
Yeah, I played it back when it launched. I was compelled by the concept of the game. I thought the pixel art looked really great, and
Yeah.
I am assuming this came out in like a lull. Switch used to have terrible droughts, and it still does to an extent. But I happen to remember having a strange fixation for this game. I think 2018 is when it came out.
Yeah.
And it's cute. I think that platformers that remove your ability to jump are very clever.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what this does. But I agree with you. I don't think that core concept can hold up an entire game.
Yeah. And I think for me, I honestly I have nothing against the game. I think it's good at what it does, and I'm sure it's probably better as a mobile game in terms of, setting your expectations properly and it being really accessible on your phone. But as soon as I put it on a console, I'm like, okay, I want a little more of this. And
Sure.
great pixel art, solid music, fun concept. I think the puzzles are good. It's just a little too barren for me.
Well, let's talk about a game that was also on mobile and came to console, which I finished this
Transition.
week. Fucking perfect segue. I'm gonna take credit for the assist and the shot on that one.
Sure.
And that's of
That's
course,
fine.
yeah, of course. I think this makes sense to do. I want to talk about Part-Time UFO, which is a little fun game from HAL Laboratories, which released
You might
first
have
on
heard of them.
mobile. Yeah, might heard of them. They made Kirby or whatever. Released on mobile back in I think 2018, I believe, and then came
Sounds
over
right.
to Switch last fall. And basically, you play as a little UFO who works for a moving company, and you're doing all kinds of ridiculous challenges where you're doing different jobs for people. Sometimes you're just simply moving things for them, or sometimes you're using a little claw to stack people, to stack cheerleaders into a big pyramid, or to make a ice cream sundae with different toppings that you're picking up, or
Yeah.
you're rebuilding like dinosaur statues in a museum. It's very clever, and it all comes down to this very central action puzzle gimmick of being a solo UFO, working for the moving company, and you basically having a crane game type crane you drop down to pick stuff up and put somewhere else.
Yeah.
Physics based, very simple, very charming. I really enjoy this game a lot.
Yeah,
Um,
I've got some experience with it. I have it on my phone. I got it, I think, when it came out, and I
yeah,
certainly enjoyed what I played of it. I think it's a game I probably would have engaged with a lot more if I had it on console, which technically I do. But
yeah,
I think that it hits every metric that a mobile game needs to, and of course, I think that translates over to it being a good game to play on console,
yeah,
especially because I think the Switch version has more content. It's got co-op. It's got a couple extra
yes.
levels, something like that. Um, but it's got that HAL charm, and I think it's clear because it's developed by a much more experienced developer in terms of they've made console games for a long time, that they know what they're doing in terms of
Yeah.
variety and keeping it fresh in a way that Bomb Chicken, while Nitrum's very experienced, they're experienced with browser games. And the simplicity of those translates nicely to mobile games, but there's something more robust about how making a mobile game, and Part-Time UFO hits all the metrics.
I wouldn't go as far as to call this game robust. I
Sure.
think the reason
In
it succeeds is
comparison,
that
I would say.
sure. I have no clue why anyone would want to play this game on their phone, especially now that
Mhm.
it's out on Switch, because it's simple mechanically, but you have to be fairly precise. And I think I probably would have cracked my phone over my knee if I had to try to play this with a virtual crane and D-pad. But I think why this game succeeds is because it is very bizarre in the challenges you put through. It's incredibly
Mhm.
charming as a result. Great presentation, great soundtrack, and it's really the right length experience. It's about 30 stages. You can blast through in a couple hours, but there's a lot of room to return to those levels and get 3 stars and complete the little side
Yeah.
challenges, and then unlock new customizations for your character and various things. And on Switch, you have co-op, and this is a hilarious game to play in co-op when you're trying to stack literal people on top of each other and you're both knocking into each other, and it's really great. I think that it's a testament to the fact that Nintendo needs to further prioritize these sort of eShop, 3DS eShop-esque releases on Switch.
Yeah.
So I was really glad that this came here, and I think this is the best place to play it, obviously. I think it's a little bit too obtuse in some respects because
Okay.
you have to get a certain number of like stars to move on, but they don't really do a great job outlining what the star challenges are. They're not too
Mm.
complicated to figure out, but I think a little bit more clarity would remove just a little bit of fogginess from an experience that otherwise very straightforward. But on the whole, especially for I think it's like $7, it's
Yeah.
very much worth playing.
Yeah, I don't think I ever got to the point where I needed a certain amount of stars
Yeah,
to like continue. Like first few levels or whatever, first 10 or so levels, you can just get easily 2 or 3 stars on them because
yeah,
they are basic. And I probably dropped it off after that because I don't really engage with mobile games in the way that I used to when I was 8 on my iTouch. Um,
yeah,
so I can't comment on that complaint, but it does make sense. Star ratings in games have never been something that I like because there is that obtuse factor. It's like, okay, well, if I think back to new Pokemon Snap, why the fuck is this picture a 4 star instead of a 5 star, or a 3 star instead of a 4 star, whatever. I don't think star ratings really compel me to want to get better, especially when there isn't a clear reason why, okay, this is each star rating, unless it's score based. Um, so yeah, that's a totally valid complaint, and honestly, I think that applies to a lot of games that use star rating systems. But that's a discussion for another time.
sure.
What else do I have? Oh yeah, yesterday I played and beat Dear Esther on PS4. This is I played Dear Esther Landmark Edition, which is an HD remake of a game that was initially a Half-Life 2 mod. Um,
Oh, okay.
Dear Esther, I think, was released in 2008 or something, and so it's an old game, and this is really the game that started a the walking sim genre very clearly. It's 100% a walking sim game through and through, but b like that games as art movement of this is poetic, this is experiential, um but it set a framework for future uh walking sim games that I think are infinitely superior, and
Sure.
that just makes it feel really bland and kind of up its own ass. I don't like pretentious stuff very much, and this game drops you into an island and just has a guy spout poetry at you, and it's like, fucking walk. Not nothing to really find in the environments, nothing to really do, no real satisfying twist ending, no real mystery. It's like an hour and 10 minutes long max, so it's not like you're wasting your time a ton. But I think this game acts more as a beginning for what came after. I don't think it holds up necessarily in comparison to the greats of the walking sim genre, Edith Finch, Gone Home, Firewatch, these games that took that, put some more interactivity in it, much more compelling narratives to want to explore the worlds that you're put in, much more
Yeah.
interesting environments to explore, much more interesting visual styles. It's it's fine, but it really isn't for me. And I found myself more often than not feeling like, okay, I can just turn my brain off and literally go in the other room while I'm holding forward on my stick
Sure.
and like go get an apple or whatever, because nothing's gonna happen. There's no danger. If a voice clip starts playing, I'll hear it. And like even the environment that you're exploring, I found to just be really, really simple and visually not very interesting. I also played The Vanishing of Ethan Carter earlier this year, which is another early walking sim game. But even though I actually like that game less, it does something more interesting with this genre, which is insert a mystery and puzzle solving into it in a way that this game doesn't. I hate the puzzles in that game, and it makes me dislike that game. It makes it a worse experience for me.
Sure.
But this one is very simple, but it doesn't outstay its welcome. It's an hour long. It's 4 stages. It's bite sized. You can beat it and be done with it, and probably never have to think about it again. So it's got those pros and cons going for it. But if you're interested in this game, just go play Gone Home. It's this game but better. It's got a better narrative. It's got more interesting characters and a more interesting world to explore. Or Edith Finch or Firewatch, which are two of my favorite games of all time. Like Dear Esther, I can't really give a recommendation unless you're just morbidly curious about how the walking sim genre sort of evolved.
Sure. Yeah. I have no interest in this game. Frankly, I have little interest in walking sims in general.
Yeah.
I think that we're at a point where games can tell much more complex stories with much more satisfying gameplay.
Mm-hmm.
And while I am curious to try something like a Firewatch, because I find it very aesthetically interesting, having tried the Edith Finch earlier this year, I can't help but feel that there's not a lot to these games, and I'd rather have this narrative told to me in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was never going to play Dear Esther in the
No,
first place.
no, of course not.
But
Yeah, the one thing I would say about Edith Finch and Firewatch is that not only do they take this basic gameplay concept of mostly you're just walking. I don't think any of them have a jump button. But Firewatch has significantly more interesting characters. There's a lot more interaction in the environments and actually side content to do, which makes it more interesting to explore the world. And obviously the fantastic visuals. I think it's one of the best art
sure,
style games of all time, in my opinion. But Edith Finch, I would say, takes this and gives it variety in a way that none of the other ones have. There's what, like 12 different mini stories for you to go through that are interconnected within this larger narrative, and each one has its own gameplay loop, and they're not very long, but they feed into the narrative of the characters and then the world that you're exploring. And I think that's what makes that game so special. And also, just the Finch household is one of the greatest designed locations in a video game. It's a fucking house with a tower on top of it, with extra things going off of it, and a greenhouse and a bus coming out. And you're like, whoa, holy shit. And then there's a basement with a guy who's been down there for so many years. And then there's a tunnel. And it's, I really do love that game. And it's unfortunate that, it's a very niche gameplay style. So it's fine that, that doesn't resonate with you. But that game in particular, and I'm using this mostly to shit on Dear Esther,
sure.
just does so much with what you're given in terms of simplicity of the mechanics and exploration and all that. So I highly recommend the games that aren't Dear Esther. Let's end the segment by saying that.
Right on. So yeah, one left.
I do.
Yeah, I got one left also. I played Bayonetta 2 this week.
Yeah,
This
you
game's
fucking did.
fucking awesome. Holy crow. I bought this a long time ago, and played a little bit of it and then just didn't play enough to get hooked. But I tried it again, and this game is fucking nuts. This is easily the best platinum game I've played.
Wow. Okay.
Having jumped into a lot of fun. I don't like Nier Automata very much.
Mhm.
For the record, I have played and don't like Nier Automata, so feel free to invalidate my opinion on Bayonetta 2. But I think this game is terrific. It's a character action game. It's nothing inherently new. If you played a DMC5, I think you're going to understand the level of polish you're going to get out of Bayonetta 2. But I think what's so great about this game is how insane it is. The game is 16 chapters long. You can probably get through it in 7-8 hours. And every chapter has a new set piece and boss, which makes you completely fall out of your chair. Let me tell you something. The way that Platinum is able to continually up the ante on themselves is very interesting. And I think that you talked about how in Tetris Effect there were low points. There's not a single low point to Bayonetta 2.
Yeah.
The game is only highs, and the highs keep ramping. And the fact that they're able to do that and sustain it over the experience shows a lot of skill over this type of game design.
Sure, yeah. And of course, that's what Platinum is known for. It's not like this is their first foray. But
No.
I one thing that I'm just spinning this off to comment is one thing I mentioned in my Ratchet review is I think there's something to not necessarily reinventing the wheel, but to quote the late great Tucker Hazel, to taking the wheel and polishing it until it shines. And I think that's something that applies to a lot of these games that we absolutely love, that are in genres that have been done a lot, but making it, as you're saying, one of the best of its genre, I think is a really impressive feat.
Yeah, and also helps this is only the second Bayonetta game in comparison to like the 85th Ratchet and Clank game, which is part of my problem there. But I'm not great at these games, but I think this is really an accessible one. There's a lot of ways to scale down. I played on normal, but it's very easy to understand, okay, this is the kind of loadout I like, these are the combos I like, and I can work my way through the game. And what's so satisfying is that this is a very dodge-heavy game. If you dodge at the right time, you go into witch time, which is basically slow-mo, and you can fuck people up in witch time.
It's your down special, everyone, just to, clarify.
Yes. And so you get into this really awesome rhythm of dodging into witch time, hitting your combo out of witch time, jumping back and forth. And it's so fucking flashy. When people are going nuts all around you and you're going nuts with Bayonetta and you're on the ground and you're spinning around, your heel guns are going off and you're fucking shooting your whips and you're using your big hair creations to hit people. And some of the best art direction I've seen in any game, when these fucking crazy looking, like mythological, religious inspired enemies are coming at you. It really is a sight to behold, and the game runs incredibly well in both I played on Switch. Runs incredibly well in both handheld and docked mode. I'm really impressed by the smoothness of the game. And sounds awesome. Tucker, this is gonna be the worst thing I've ever said on the channel. It reminds me of why I like Persona 5, in the sense that it has such a strong personality, which feels sort of extra diegetic in the way that you're going into combat and then there's this awesome vocal theme that's playing, and it's this big characters, loud personalities, really interesting designs and concepts that elevate not a JRPG in this case, but a character action game to be something a little bit more special. So that's all great. The bad part is I talked about Persona 5 in the game seeming like Persona 5. And you can't do that.
But you do hold on, what's the problem here? You liked Persona 5, you didn't finish it, but you enjoy what you played, and you have a huge amount of respect for that game. I don't think anyone's complaining.
Yeah, but the whole meme is that everything is inspired by Persona 5.
I see what you're saying. I would say that's a comparison to Persona 5. There was no implication there that Bayonetta drew any inspiration whatsoever.
No, of course
obviously
not.
Factually impossible from
Factually
Persona 5.
impossible. It came out several years before.
But I think that's a great game. I love applying it to entirely random stuff. You go outside, you look at a tree, and oh shit. Kind of reminds me of Persona 5. That's a great fucking meme. I got nothing against that meme.
It's a great meme. But here's my one criticism of the game is its narrative. So I haven't played Bayonetta 1. From everything I've seen and understand, Bayonetta 2 is a lot flashier, more colorful, better gameplay. And frankly, this is a gameplay first experience. So I'd rather jump to 2.
Yeah.
And so it's not that I'm like, God damn it, this game doesn't tell me everything I should have learned from Bayonetta 1. My problem is more that it's told in a very complicated way.
Sure.
And it's also told in a way that's very reflective of its probably small budget as a Wii U exclusive. There are some full cinematics which look stunning, but there are a lot of cinematics that are told through this almost like slideshow type format,
Sure.
which still try to convey action. And when they do, it becomes kind of hard to follow exactly who is moving where and what they're responding to. There's not the level of clarity that these full cinematics give, which can be disorienting and not service the narrative on the whole. It's a bit disappointing, especially because the characters are fucking awesome. Bayonetta is an awesome character. I didn't realize how overtly sexual Bayonetta is.
Yeah.
It's absurd, and I think it's part of the charm. I think absurdity really is why Bayonetta as an entire game works.
Sure.
The character as a gameplay experience, whatever. But this game's just fucking awesome. It's really awesome. I've got very few complaints with the gameplay. I think she has almost like Shantae-esque transformations.
Yeah, I saw her turn into a panther when you were running around the open world. I'm like, what the fuck? I didn't know that happened.
Yeah, which is that one's cool. There's another one where you can transform in combat to like a bird creature, but you also transform to like an eel at one point for underwater segments, which doesn't quite control right. Which was a little bit. That was the only point where I think the gameplay faltered at all. Otherwise, I think it's basically a perfect gameplay experience. But on the whole, this game's fucking awesome. I can't wait for Bayonetta 3 now. That quickly just shot up the list of games I'm excited for. So I'm really glad I played it. Highly recommend it. Highly recommend it. Play it before Astral Chain. Play it before any of Platinum's other nonsense. This is the best stuff to do.
I have basically no experience with character action games. It's another one of those genres when I'm looking at things like shoot 'em ups and beat 'em ups and games that are focused solely on combat in a way that I personally just find to be all flash and no substance. And of course, I haven't played the game, so it's I think kind of an unfair expectation. But I really do want to try them. And earlier, as we were talking about Streets of Rage, I want to be hopping into genres that I've never tried before. And Bayonetta is one that I think looks really fun. I have no particular draw to it, but considering it's something that I have no experience with, I'm running on 2 hours of sleep right now, by the way, so I'm trying my best to stay lucid. I'm interested to hop into it and hopefully get into the series, get into that gameplay style, because I've never played a Devil May Cry. I've never played Bayonetta. I've never even tried one of the Muso games, which is of course a little bit different, but just seeing flashy moves isn't really instantly appealing to me, but I understand the appeal.
Well, I think that's because you're stupid, and this is why you're stupid, because you're like Drax. You're not catching things as they go over your head. There's a lot more to these games. Their style and substance, and I think that's why they work. The depth,
much like Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart.
No,
I think that's because you're stupid. Go.
But in all seriousness, I think the reason these games work is because there's a fighting game like depth to the combat systems. Sure. The amount of combos you have as Bayonetta, the ways that you can chain moves into each other, and how many options you have, and how much you have to change your style based on who you're fighting, really does add a lot. It's not just, oh shit, hit the buttons and things look cool and they're fucking exploding into blood particles and clouds and everything, right? I think that games like Bayonetta 2 and DMC5, which has a lot of great accessibility options, are great for trying character action games and easing your way into them. Because I'm doing that myself, so I can play, my DMC3s and things of that nature too. So
things of that nature, yeah.
I recommend giving it a shot, because I think there's way more here than you're letting on.
Yeah, and I also, and I know this is gonna drive you absolutely batty, but I have Bayonetta 1 on my Switch. And considering how I like to, for the most part, approach game series is watching them evolve throughout their iterations, I would much rather start with 1. And I have access to it because I bought the game fucking forever ago. So if I'm going to play 1, I'm going to start there. And maybe, that's not the best from a gameplay experience, but I have the game. And if it does hook me in, and I know it's not very long, I will gladly give 2 a try.
I also have Bayonetta 1, and I think I might go back and play it. But like I said, you play these games for the gameplay and for the spectacle of the bosses and the combos and everything. The narrative is just there to be there. It's like treasure. It's like you're sending punishments to Ikaruga. There's a story because there has to be a story.
Sure.
And there's a lot of lore here. There seems like there is actually an interesting Bayonetta storyline here, but...
And I think that's why, and obviously this just goes to the subjective ways that we engage with video game experiences, but even for something that is as gameplay focused, I really want it to be supported
Yeah.
by something I'm engaged with in terms of a narrative. So if I start with the
Sure.
first one and I'm given a baseline to why the story of the second one is so interesting in comparison and how it evolves the mechanics and the characters and all of that, I want some sort of baseline, and jumping into something that's clearly intended as a sequel in terms of a narrative isn't very appealing to me, and I think that's why I
Yeah.
would rather start with the original. But you know, I'm a very big story guy. I'm a very big lore guy in terms of how I enjoy approaching my games, and even for something as combo heavy, gameplay heavy as Bayonetta, your complaint about the story, being told convolutedly, it would make more sense if you had played the first one, and honestly, you
Yeah.
probably would have enjoyed the story a little more. Of course, that's not required for you to have a great experience with the game, but I interesting juxtaposition. But we're talking about story, we're talking about characters. We gotta jump to my last game of the week, and the game that we're gonna be tying this episode up with a red string bow because we are talking about the Red Strings Club. How do you
Yes.
like? How you fucking like that for a transition,
I liked it a
Bucko?
lot. Now I want to slow you down because
Oh,
I've heard of
oh,
this game by name. I want you to explain to me what the gameplay is, what the narrative is, because you can
sure.
really like this game and I want to understand it.
This is a. I hesitate to call it a point and click adventure game because it's not. It is a narrative game based entirely on choice, though there is very interesting gameplay segments in this that I think
Yeah.
make it more engaging than something where you're just clicking around. And I don't have a ton of experience with point and click adventure games. Who knows? I might like them if I got more into the genre. That's a theme of today's episode. Um, but this game is I, I have to slow myself down and center because I played this from 10 p.m. to midnight last night and then
Sure.
an extra hour this morning and finished a run of it, a playthrough. So it's very short, clearly 3 hours, whatever. It is set in a cyberpunk world.
I already
You
like it.
Yes, and I genuinely do think that while the gameplay style might not gravitate you towards it instantly, this cyberpunk narrative is on such another level in terms of its nuance and the amount of time that you have to experience it. I really do think you would enjoy it. And if
Yeah.
I were to sell this game to you, I would sell it only on that concept alone. You are a bartender in a cyberpunk world. You are one of the last people who doesn't have any sort of body modifications. He has some sort of fucking disease where he can't his body rejects
Sure.
body modifications. But you're in a world where everyone has body modifications. You're a bartender and you have this ability to see the emotions in people and know what alcohols to mix to hit them in the perfect like emotional sweet spot of a drink experience. I don't drink alcohol. I don't fucking know if that makes any sense or I've never had a euphoric alcoholic experience before.
Sure.
But it's a gameplay thing where you have to mix different drinks by tilting the bottles and shaking things up to get a thing to move to a particular spot on their body to hit them in the right spot. It is an interesting gameplay loop in terms of the creativity of that. But you are not only a bartender, but an information dealer. You are an underground, connected to the corporations, connected to the resistances. You are using your powers of alcoholic persuasion to extract information out of people, get to know them, hit them in their emotional cores so that they talk to you more easily. And
Sure.
I think that's a really great way to incorporate alcohol, which is not something I like, into a gameplay concept that I really engaged with. And you are thrown into this story of a government corporation that is creating a way for they're creating androids. They're creating a way to control the emotions of the populace, and you are siding with an underground organization that's trying to infiltrate and topple them. And as different CEOs, lawyers, whatever from this company come into your bar, you're trying to eke information out of them so you can feed it into your notebook, your database, use it to ask questions later. And all of this funnels into a choice system that is what the red string of the game is, which is a branching narrative of how each of your conversations go and how good you are at getting information out of them entirely changes the ways that characters interact with one another in the later on in the story. Different story moments will take place. And I had multiple times where I'm not very good at interrogation based games like this. So I messed up quite a lot, but it still lets you go forward and it lets those moments impact you and you still get to the end of a story. And I think that's
Sure.
really fascinating. I had a few moments where I would mess up a question, and my mess up of that question where I was like trying to meta game, like, okay, they want me to say this, but I'll choose something else. I ended up like ruining someone's entire career, and they killed themselves because I like
Hmm.
exposed them to their boss, and then the other characters were reacting to that later on. And I think there's just such an interesting interplay here between the ways that you're interacting with the characters, how condensed the narrative is, and how much choice and impact you have on the world around you. I don't think there are multiple endings, but the ways that you get there, there might be a couple, but the ways that you get there really make the arc feel a lot different. And I don't know if I'll end up replaying it because I kind of like the idea of this was my Red Strings
Yeah,
Club experience and this is the story. Yeah, I messed up. Yeah, I wish I'd made some choices differently, but that's what my character Donovan did in the moment. And it also gets
sure.
really into the nitty gritty of cyberpunk is like, what is humanity, how important are emotions, and it tackles all these themes in a way that is pretty pretentious, but I think that the self-seriousness of the game and the way that it tackles each of these themes from multiple places, like you get perspectives from the corporations, you get perspectives from your bartender and the androids and the resistances and all that, makes it so that pretentiousness doesn't really, it's not an issue to me, even though I
Yeah,
do recognize that it's, self-serious in its dialogue and it's tackling all these fucking gigabrain
sure.
concepts. Um, but I really do recommend it. I think it's not that expensive. It's a Devolver game. It's got fantastic pixel art, great music. It's pretty much perfect in what it's going for. I honestly really think that you'd enjoy just going for a single 3 hour playthrough of it.
Yeah, I think this is one that I'll tuck under the old cap there,
Mm-hmm.
because I like that concept a lot, of being the bartender of the cyberpunk universe, kind of approaching that set of themes and aesthetics through a new lens. I think that's all
Yeah.
very interesting, and I really like the idea of making mistakes and the narrative moving on. I think
Yeah.
that's part of why, for instance, the game that kind of getting similar vibes from LA Noire, which I really love,
Mm-hmm.
has similar themes there in terms of, oops, I fucked up an interrogation, but the game's going to walk on without me. I think that's very curious.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think my biggest problem would just be that lack of interaction from a mechanical perspective compelling
Mm-hmm.
me. But in 3 hours on the back of your recommendation and everything, I think I can probably put my interest in gameplay mechanics aside
Yeah.
for an evening and giving it a shot. So maybe that's be a good sale pickup for me.
Yeah. I definitely think so. I've had a lot of conversations, believe it or not, in the past day with people about difficulty in games and accessibility
Yes.
and what gameplay necessarily means for different kinds of gamers. And this game, I think, is a perfect example of it is definitely a video game. I mean, you are
Yeah.
making narrative choices and you're impacting the world around you. And there are game mechanics in terms of, there's actually multiple game mechanics. I only mentioned the mixing the drinks one,
Yeah.
but you've got like this sort of pottery thing where as an android, you're crafting the implants to put into people and you can influence their personalities through that. And then there's a sort of information based like hacking mini game later on where you impersonate other people's not mini
Yeah.
game, but it's a
Sure.
section of the game. You impersonate other people's voices, and because you're impersonating them, people will react different ways to you over the phone, and it's really interesting. But through all of those different things, the ways that it tells an interactive narrative make this a really compelling video game experience. This obviously
Sure.
couldn't be done in another medium. You can't just watch a movie to get the experience of this game. You can't just read a book to get the experience of this game. It's something that's unique to video
Yeah.
games. And while there's not a fail state, even if you fuck up, the story moves on. And I find that really compelling. I was talking to a lot of people where it's like, okay, well, if there's no sense at or there's no chance at dying, then what's the point? Why would you succeed? It's like, well, there's other reasons to play video games, experiencing
Yeah.
the worlds and the art and the music and exploration and story and characters interactivity doesn't necessarily require a huge amount of skill to be enjoyable, a huge amount of depth to be enjoyable, fail states to be enjoyable. There's plenty of games we talked earlier, long ago about Flower. There's no fucking fail states in that game, but it's
Yeah.
still a fantastic video game. It's a great experience. I was talking earlier about Firewatch and Edith Finch, these games that tell incredible interactive narratives that are incredibly immersive. You can't die in those games. I don't think that's necessarily a fair, you know, detractor of a video game saying you can't die in it, so it's not a video game. I think that's ridiculous.
Yes, no, I agree with you. I think that's divergent from where I would have taken the conversation in the sense that gameplay does mean a lot of things. I totally agree, but what I like is input driven gameplay
Yeah.
where it's about me engaging with the world directly,
Hmm.
whether that's through combat or jumping or solving a puzzle, rotating a Tetris piece,
Sure.
things like that. That compels me more. And what I love in these sort of more cerebral narrative experiential games is when they are still input driven. So like an Abzu, a Grease, a Journey, things like these. Even Flower. Flower is a gameplay experience
Hmm.
inherently, and it's an active gameplay experience. There's nothing really passive about Flower.
Yeah.
It's very tactile, moving your controller around and everything. So when you start to make it more Telltale-esque in the way that it's very hands-off, or you start to go into the realm of point and click, then it does start to lose me a little bit. But there's space for all kinds of experiences, and
Yeah.
there's certainly benefit in trying them. So
Yeah.
on sale, maybe I'll give a little red string shot at club try. I'll
Yeah.
play the fucking game.
100%.
That's what I'll
And I
say.
think why this game is so interesting in terms of the ways you interact in the world is you're doing it intentionally indirectly. Like narratively, it makes sense that you're
Yeah.
manipulating people to get them to interact with other people in different ways. And while I don't play a lot of these interrogation based games, I played the Ace Attorney sections of Professor Layton versus Phoenix Wright, and I have no fucking clue what I was doing, and I found it very frustrating. Of course, I was
Yeah.
a dumb fucking kid, but I think I'm learning to see why this is a genre that lots of people enjoy, and it's my point earlier is not that gameplay is not important for video games.
Yeah.
99.9% of the video games that I love are gameplay first experiences, but that not having that gameplay is, while it might not be enjoyable to you, a totally valid game experience, an interactive medium experience, which makes it by definition a video game. And I'm mostly using this segment to like indirectly shit on the people who are being assholes like to me at like
Yes.
3 a.m. last night.
Sure.
um
Yes.
but but I think it's a really interesting conversation to have. It's been on my mind a lot since I've been talking to so many people about it, and it's something that I've been considering a lot when thinking, okay, well, why do I like this game over this game, and how do I weigh narrative versus gameplay, and how important should it be for the medium? And the great part is, there are games across the spectrum that are all fantastic. Ones that are
Yeah.
solely narrative based with very little gameplay that tell some of the best stories in the medium. Some that have fucking Mario games that are incredible gameplay, they dick ass story, but they're still great. And I think that's why I love games so much. And I just wish people would be a little more open minded and less reductive, because I think it's really not productive to say no, that's not a game. Like, you're not a gamer if you play point and click adventure games. So what the fuck are you talking about? That's ridiculous.
Well, my opinion is who really gives a shit about what most of the people on Twitter say?
Of course, yes.
That's where I really come down on that situation. But I do think there's something to be said for remembering why games are special, and that being their interactivity.
Yes.
And so I personally feel that games are becoming too cinematic, and I think it
Sure.
works in certain situations. I think Naughty Dog can get away with it because they're just operating on a level that is so far removed from what the rest of the industry is doing. But when I think of compelling video game stories, I think of Breath of the Wild story,
Mm-hmm.
because it's not the story about Calamity Ganon, it's the story about your Link and where he went after the Great Plateau, and how that game legitimately evoked a feeling of adventure,
Yeah.
opposed to putting you through a series of gameplay segments buttressed by cutscenes that told you were going on an adventure.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I would really like to see the industry move in a direction where those are the sorts of stories that become more prominent. Not to say that there isn't a place for an inherently cinematic story in games, but because just make me a movie at a certain point, which is not to say that you can't have crossover and have hybrids and take things in new directions, or pull in aspects from other mediums, but to say that I think that the hyperfixation on cinematic realism is not necessarily the best way to tell a story, in my opinion.
Sure. I mean, I I would say I agree in concept. My hesitancy, and I'm wrapping up here. I think we're pretty much done for the episode. But my hesitancy would just be that I think showing video games as an impactful storytelling medium is a lot easier to the masses when you can say, look, there's this acting to it, there's
Yeah.
a narrative with themes that are clearly written by a writer. And I love those kind of games. I personally have nothing against narrative and gameplay being separated. I love me some cutscenes, whatever. But I think that's the reason the industry is trending that way, and I don't necessarily think it's a negative thing overall. It's a gameplay trend shift. Games are of course reaching a peak where they can have the quality, the length, the depth of a movie story, and even surpass that. And people like the folks at Naughty Dog, at Sony Santa Monica, want to reach the levels of a fucking Godfather or
Sure.
the Odyssey or whatever by emulating those. And of course, we're still gonna get those gameplay first story experiences like your Breath of the Wild, and I'm glad there is that variety, because when I go back to a lot of older games and they're telling their stories through the most basic stuff, I honestly don't find that compelling. I think that there's a lot more enjoyment for me, and of course there's places for a huge variety, but to be told a more explicit story that you can discuss in a more in-depth way because it is presented to you. So it's all about variety. It's all about making sure you try all sorts of things to see what you stick with, and not demeaning the other gameplay types because they're all equally as interesting.
I think I'll say two things. One, the game industry is so young.
Yeah,
I feel like there's a ridiculous desire to prove gaming to the masses, to take the term
yeah,
you took. But gaming trounces a lot of these other mediums in terms of
it is.
revenue driven.
Yeah, it's the most revenue focused medium on planet.
Yeah, there's nothing that gaming has to prove, and I just think that kind of aping the aesthetics of other mediums is not necessarily the best way to push ours forward. I think that, like I said, there's rooms for your Red Dead Redemption 2s and your Last of Us Part 2s, the latter of which being one of my 10 favorite games of all time, right? So I totally see the appeal of that, but I'm tired of that being the sole focus.
Sure. Yeah.
And the other thing I have to say is I think there's room to be mean to each other a little bit more in the games industry.
Sure.
Not attack each other ad hominem, but I'm a little bit frustrated, and I will say, to the point about, because people keep talking about Twitter discourse, which first of all, that term drives me up a wall.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's room to be a little bit more challenging towards other people's opinions.
Sure.
I think there's room for a little bit more dissent. I think we get to a point in games conversation a lot where it becomes very homogenized and everybody is saying the same thing and you can't say the other thing. I feel like that's very quickly happens whenever we talk about difficulty.
Yeah.
I'm a lot more, frankly, I'm a lot more interested to hear somebody tell me why there should not be a difficulty option in a game than why there should be.
Sure. Yeah.
And I want to open up that conversation a little bit, because one side clearly it is what the in group in the media believes and what they're going to propagate, and that's great, and I agree with it in part, but what are these other people saying and why are they saying it? That's what I find interesting.
Sure. Yeah. Oh, the fucking media. It's all about the in-group.
It's
of
all
the
about the
media
media.
and
It's
the
all about the
fucking.
media.
Oh well. But we're not the media. We are BLB. Yeah, you're kind of the fucking media. I don't know. You're like my mole, kind of a little hairless
something like
fucking
that.
underground
Something like
mammal.
that.
But we are BLB, and this is our show. Who the fuck cares that we played all these games? I don't know, but I think we had some really, really good conversations here today.
Yeah.
This is I'm fucking tired. Let me tell you, I'm surprised I was able to get through all of these conversations and in the depth and nuance that I was able to project. I'm proud of myself for goddamn once.
You did a great job. You did a
Thank
very
you,
good
thank
job.
And this episode will be going up. BLB now, clearly, if you're watching this as it comes out, is on Fridays. We'll have to see what changes. Loki is over now, so the Wednesdays things might not be. Who the fuck knows? We're always on the fly
Sure.
with manipulating our schedule to make we're not stacking things on top of one another. But as for now, BLB is going up on Fridays. Yay!
Tucker, I like the idea. We just put this on camera, so we have to actually address it and consider it. I
Just
like
the
the
spit
idea
back.
that no, I don't want to talk about that. I like the idea that Untitled Marvel Project stays around
Mhm.
and it becomes a bit of a comic book club.
That'd be awesome. That's a fucking. Okay, all right. I'll pitch. I'll talk to Tanner about that. Or you are a big boy. You can talk to Tanner. He's not that scary. He doesn't
No.
bite that hard.
You bite
bite-
far harder.
Oh, well, you don't even want to know. Ever seen
And
me
the
eat a
fucking
carrot?
episode.
Oh, okay. What's the exhale for? I hate it when you breathe out. Stop doing that.
It's to get air in and out of my body. I think I start. What do? I cycle CO2 out and oxygen in.
Yeah, one of the two. Vice versa.
I know the oxygen comes in. I'm less certain about what goes out. I'm pretty sure it's CO2.
Pretty sure you put out bullshit. Woo! Let's go.